Everyone else walked past the dying wolf. The Omega didn't. Snow fell heavily over the mountain trail, burying footprints almost as quickly as they were made. Merchants hurried toward the village before darkness swallowed the forest. Hunters tightened their cloaks against the bitter wind. Then someone pointed beneath a fallen pine. A wolf. The silver she-wolf lay half buried in the snow. Her breathing was shallow. One hind leg was swollen from a deep infection. Mud and blood stained her once beautiful coat. She tried to lift her head. Instead, she collapsed with a weak growl. Most people turned away. "Leave her," an old merchant muttered. "She won't survive the night." A hunter stepped forward, lowering his spear. "I'll end her suffering." Before anyone could move, another figure stepped between them. Cale Rowan, the quiet Omega herbalist. He knelt beside the wolf and gently brushed snow from her fur. Only then did he notice the gentle curve of her belly. His eyes widened. "She's carrying pups." The hunter frowned. "Then all the more reason. They'll die with her." Cale slowly shook his head. "No." The villagers exchanged puzzled looks. "She's only a stray," someone argued. Cale looked up. His voice remained calm. "No mother carrying children is only anything." Without waiting for permission, he removed his heavy winter cloak and wrapped it around the trembling wolf. She bared her teeth, growled weakly. He smiled. "I know. You're frightened." With enormous effort, he lifted her onto the small wooden sled he normally used to carry herbs down the mountain. The hunter sighed. "You're risking your own life for a dying animal." Cale tightened the ropes around the sled. "Maybe." He began pulling it through the deep snow. "But if I leave her here, I'll lose something much more important than my life." The blizzard swallowed his footprints as he disappeared toward the valley. Behind him, the silver she-wolf slowly opened one eye. She watched the quiet Omega struggling through the snow. Then, for the first time since collapsing, she stopped growling. For 4 days, the fire in Cale's little cabin never went out. Neither did he. He barely slept. Each morning, he cleaned the infection in the she-wolf's injured leg with warm water and crushed mountain herbs. Each afternoon, he coaxed her to drink broth from a wooden bowl. Each evening, he changed the bandages wrapped carefully around her wound. Every time he reached toward her, she growled. Every time she growled, Cale smiled. "I know. It hurts." The wolf never let him touch her without complaint. Yet, she never bit him. Outside, the villagers shook their heads whenever they passed the cabin. "He's wasting medicine. That wolf won't live. Neither will the pups." Cale ignored them all. On the 5th morning, he offered the wolf a small piece of cooked venison. Instead of snapping at it, she hesitated. Then, very gently, she ate from his hand. Cale smiled. "There you are. I knew you were still fighting." That night, a fierce wind rattled the cabin windows. The she-wolf suddenly whined. She struggled to stand, then collapsed again. Cale hurried to her side. "It's time." The labor lasted until dawn. By sunrise, 3 tiny pups lay wrapped in warm blankets beside their exhausted mother. 2 breathed with tiny squeaks. The 3rd never took its first breath. Cale quietly carried the smallest pup outside. Beneath an old cedar tree, he dug a grave in the frozen ground. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You were loved." When he returned to the cabin, the mother wolf lifted her head. For the first time, she didn't growl. She rested her head against Cale's hand. Just for a moment. A silent thank you. He gently stroked her silver fur. "They'll be all right." He truly believed the hardest part was over. Then, hoofbeats thundered through the valley. Voices shouted outside the cabin. and someone pounded hard against the front door. The pounding on the door grew louder. "Open in the name of the Alpha King." Kale carefully tucked the two sleeping pups beneath a warm blanket before crossing the room. The silver she-wolf struggled to her feet. Though weak, she positioned herself between Kale and the door. He smiled gently. "You don't have to protect me," she answered with a soft growl. Kale opened the door. A dozen royal guards stood outside, their horses steaming in the winter air. At their head was a stern-faced captain. "We're searching for the Alpha King's missing Luna." Kale frowned. "I haven't seen any Luna." The captain's eyes drifted past him into the cabin. Before he could speak again, a familiar whine sounded behind Kale. The silver she-wolf slowly limped into the doorway. The captain's face lost all color. He immediately dropped to one knee. Every guard followed. "My Luna." One young soldier wiped tears from his eyes. "We finally found her." Kale stared in confusion. "Luna?" The she-wolf ignored the kneeling soldiers. Instead, she walked to Kale's side and leaned gently against his leg. The captain smiled through his tears. "She remembers who saved her." The sound of galloping horses echoed up the mountain path. A black stallion burst into the clearing. Its rider leaped to the ground before the horse had fully stopped. Alpha King Rydian Stormveil. Snow clung to his dark cloak as he crossed the yard with hurried steps. The moment his eyes found the silver wolf, every trace of fear vanished from his face. "My Luna!" His voice broke. The she-wolf looked at him. She took one step forward, then paused. Turning back, she nudged Kale's hand with her nose before walking to Rydian. The Alpha King understood immediately. She wasn't choosing between them. She was making sure the man who had saved her wasn't forgotten. Rydian looked past her into the cabin. Two tiny wolf pups slept peacefully beside the fire. His breath caught. He looked back at Kale. "You saved my family." Kale lowered his eyes. "We saved two." The king's wolf bowed its head. Not to another alpha, to a humble omega. The royal healer arrived before sunset. He hurried into the cabin, knelt beside the silver she-wolf, and examined her injured leg with careful hands. When he finished, he looked at Rydian. If the infection had spread one more day, he lowered his eyes. "We would have lost all three." Rydian closed his eyes. His hands trembled. The healer continued. "The poison used during the ambush trapped Her Majesty in her wolf form. It weakened her body and prevented her from shifting back. She escaped into the mountains before the assassins could find her." He glanced toward Kale. Without him, she would never have survived the infection, nor the birth. The cabin fell silent. Rydian turned to the quiet Omega. "I searched every forest, every village. I offered rewards across the kingdom." He looked toward the sleeping pups. "And while I searched, you were here doing what mattered." Kale shook his head. "I only helped a frightened mother." "No," Rydian replied softly. "You saved my Luna, my children, and my future." The Alpha King bowed his head. It was a small gesture, but every guard in the cabin noticed it. Their king had bowed to an Omega. No one spoke. As dusk settled over the valley, the healer announced that the Luna was finally strong enough to travel. The silver she-wolf slowly rose. She walked toward the waiting sled outside, then stopped. She looked back. Without hesitation, she crossed the room to Kale. He knelt instinctively. The wolf gently pressed her forehead against his. Her warm breath drifted across his cheek. No growl, no fear, only gratitude. Kale smiled. "I'm glad you're going home." She gave one last soft nudge before following Rydian into the falling snow. The royal procession disappeared beyond the trees. The little cabin felt strangely empty. 3 weeks later, a familiar knock echoed through the quiet valley. Kale opened the door. Alpha King Ridian stood there alone. In one hand, he carried a woven basket. In the other, a sealed letter bearing the Luna's crest. Kale blinked in surprise. "Your Majesty?" Ridian smiled. "Today, just Ridian." He held out the woven basket. "I brought gifts." Kale looked inside. Packets of rare medicinal herb seeds. A new pruning knife. Fresh gardening tools. Jars of mountain honey. Items chosen with care, not extravagance. "You remembered. I grow herbs." Ridian chuckled. "My Luna made sure I did." He handed over the sealed letter. Kale broke the wax seal carefully. Inside, the Luna's graceful handwriting filled the page. "Dear Kale, the pups are growing stronger every day. Every morning, they wander to the palace door and sniff the air. The healer says they're looking for the place where they first felt safe. I think they're looking for you. Thank you for giving them their first home." With gratitude, your very stubborn patient Kale laughed softly. "They still remember the cabin?" "They do," Ridian said. "So does their mother." A comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Ridian unfolded a map from his cloak. "I didn't come only to say thank you." He spread the map across Kale's table. The valley surrounding the cabin had been carefully marked. "I want to build something here." Kale studied the drawing. "A hunting lodge?" Ridian shook his head. "A sanctuary. For injured wolves." He pointed farther down the valley. "And another building. For abandoned omegas." Kale looked up in surprise. "They deserve a place where they're valued for what they can do, not judged for who they are." The omega remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "What happens when someone arrives with nothing? No family, no money, no rank?" Ridian answered without hesitation. "They're welcomed." Kale smiled. "I have one condition." The king waited. "No one gets turned away." Ridian extended his hand. "Agreed." They shook hands. Outside, the first workers arrived with wagons full of timber and stone. Before winter had even ended, the first foundations of the sanctuary were already being laid. By the following winter, the lonely valley had completely changed. Where abandoned cabins once stood, warm stone buildings now overlooked the forest. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children laughed in the courtyards. The old trail that had once led only to Kale's cabin now welcomed wolves, travelers, and families from every corner of the kingdom. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign. "No one is turned away." Kale insisted those words be the sanctuary's only rule. Every morning began the same way. He treated injured wolves, mixed medicines from herbs growing in the gardens, taught young omegas how to care for wounded animals. The Luna worked beside him every week. Now fully recovered, she shifted easily between wolf and human form. She never forgot the tiny cabin where her life had been saved. Neither did Ridian. The Alpha King often arrived carrying lumber across one shoulder, instead of issuing commands from horseback. The workers stopped calling him, "Your Majesty." Most simply smiled and said, "Morning, Ridian." He liked that. Word spread quickly. Soon neighboring packs copied the sanctuary. Others built healing lodges of their own. Some even adopted Kale's simple rule: no one is turned away. One crisp spring afternoon, 2 silver wolf pups raced across the meadow. They had grown quickly, healthy, strong. Instead of running to their royal parents, they sprinted straight toward Kale. One jumped into his lap. The other tugged gently at his sleeve, demanding attention. The Luna laughed. "I think they love you more than us." Kale scratched behind one pup's ears. They're only hoping for extra meat. The pups wagged their tails so enthusiastically that everyone burst into laughter. Rydian watched the scene with quiet gratitude. Months earlier, these pups had nearly been lost before they ever took their first breath. Now, they had grown up surrounded by kindness. The Alpha King smiled. Not because the sanctuary had changed the kingdom, but because one Omega had first changed his heart. 5 years passed. The tiny wolf pups who had once fit inside Kale's arms now raced through the sanctuary as energetic young wolves. Every visitor noticed the same curious thing. Whenever the twins returned from the palace, they looked for Kale first. Uncle Kale, the 2 young wolves bounded across the meadow, nearly knocking him into a flower bed. Kale laughed as one wrapped his arms around his waist, while the other proudly held up a carved wooden wolf. "I made this for you. It's beautiful," Kale said, examining the careful carving. "It looks just like your mother." The boy grinned. "Father said you taught us that every injured wolf deserves a chance." Kale smiled. "I only reminded him." The twins ran off toward the river, arguing over whose carving looked better. Watching them, the Luna slipped beside Kale. "They've loved you from the day they opened their eyes." Kale chuckled. "I suspect they love the dried venison I keep in my pocket." She laughed. "Perhaps. But children don't run into someone's arms simply because of treats." She looked across the sanctuary. "They know who made them feel safe before they even knew what the word meant." Kale grew quiet. No one had ever spoken about him that way. A little later, Rydian joined them, carrying a stack of fresh lumber. "The festival committee has a question." Kale raised an eyebrow. "What kind of question?" "They're asking where family should sit during tomorrow's winter festival." "And?" Rydian smiled. "I told them you already knew." Kale looked confused. "Knew what?" The Alpha King set the lumber aside. "You won't be sitting with the healers. Or the guests." He placed a warm hand on Kale's shoulder. "You'll be sitting with us." Kale stared at him. "With the royal family?" Rydian nodded. "You stopped being our rescuer years ago." The Luna gently took Kale's other hand. "You became our family." For the first time in many years, the quiet Omega found himself unable to speak. Snow drifted gently over the sanctuary as lanterns lit the valley for the annual winter festival. People arrived from every corner of the kingdom. Alphas, betas, omegas, families carrying children on their shoulders. Even wolves from neighboring packs wandered freely through the protected forest. For the first time anyone could remember, no one asked another person's rank before offering them a seat at the feast. At sunset, Alpha King Rydian stepped onto the wooden stage. The laughter slowly faded. "My friends," he began, "years ago, this valley held only one small cabin." He smiled toward Kale. "And one Omega who refused to walk past someone everyone else had already given up on." The crowd turned to look at Kale, who stood quietly near the back. He looked as though he wished he could disappear into the snow. The Luna beckoned him forward. "Come." Reluctantly, Kale climbed onto the stage. The 2 young wolves rushed over, and each grabbed one of his hands. "You can't hide now," one whispered with a grin. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The Luna stepped forward, carrying a small velvet box. Inside rested a silver pendant shaped like a wolf, surrounded by mountain pines. "There are only a few of these in the kingdom," Rydian said. "They are worn only by those under the direct protection of the royal family." The Luna fastened the pendant around Kale's neck herself. "It doesn't repay what you gave us," she said softly, "but it reminds everyone that our family will always stand beside yours." The valley erupted into applause. Some cheered. Others wiped away tears. Among them stood the hunter who had once urged Kale to leave the dying wolf in the snow. He bowed his head. I was wrong, he admitted quietly. Kale smiled. What matters is that no one walks past them now. The crowd applauded even louder, and for the first time in the kingdom's history, and Omega stood beside the Alpha King as family, not as a servant. 10 years later, the little cabin still stood beneath the old pine trees. Its wooden walls had been repaired many times. Its roof had been replaced. But the stone fireplace remained exactly as it had been on the winter night everything changed. Every year, after the winter festival, the royal family made the same journey back to the mountain. No guards marched ahead. No royal banners flew overhead. It was simply family coming home. The grown wolf twins reached the cabin first. Laughing, they pushed open the old door. I call the spot by the fireplace. One shouted. You always do, the other replied. The Luna smiled as she watched them curl up on the same rug where they had first opened their eyes. They've never outgrown this place. They never will, Kale said, setting another log onto the fire. Ridian looked around the little room. So much has changed. Outside the window, the sanctuary stretched across the valley. Healers moved between the buildings. Children played in the snow. An injured wolf rested peacefully beneath a shelter, cared for instead of feared. No abandoned Omega was turned away. No traveler left hungry, all because one person had refused to keep walking. A young visitor who had accompanied the royal family looked around the tiny cabin in surprise. Your Majesty, why do you still come here every winter? Ridian smiled before answering. Because this is where I found my family again. The Luna gently slipped her hand into Kale's. The kingdom says an Omega rescued its future. She shook her head. No. He simply saw a frightened mother when everyone else saw a stray. The twins looked at Kale with warm smiles. And because he stopped, we had the chance to grow up. Silence settled comfortably around the fire. Snow drifted softly outside. Kale looked at the family gathered around him and felt something he had never expected to find. He belonged, not because of a title, not because of a reward, but because kindness had quietly built a home around him. Far beyond the cabin, the sanctuary lights glowed against the winter night, welcoming every lost soul who needed warmth. The kingdom remembered the Omega, who rescued a sick pregnant wolf. History remembered something even greater. One ordinary act of compassion became a family, a sanctuary, and a kingdom where no injured wolf, abandoned Omega, or forgotten soul would ever again be left behind in the snow.